back to my kitchen. Now, recently Hendrix turned 2 years old, which meant I had to plan his second birthday cake. Now, I love this cake so much, and so did he, that I wanted to recreate his cake as a tutorial for you. So in this video, I'm showing you how I made this Twinkle Twinkle owl-inspired birthday cake with these cute little stars. Okay, let's get started. So here I've got some white fondant and we're going to make some 3D clouds. Now you could make these directly onto your cake, but I'm just going to make these a little bit before, just so they've got a little bit of time to harden so that I can move them around. And I'm actually going to be using a dummy cake, which is around the same size as the finished cake that we're going to create in. And this one I've just used for creating different cake toppers in the past. So this one is 5 inches by 5 inches. Now if you don't have a dummy cake, you can also use just your cake tin, and you can use this to form your clouds around the edge, and this way you know that they'll just slot up against your cake. Now these are super simple, so all we actually need to do is create some balls. So you want to roll these out in all different sizes. So I'm just rolling these in the palm of my hand, and then I'm just going to bring in that dummy cake, and I'm just going to start laying them down against that cake. It's always great to have some slightly bigger ones at the bottom, and then just build this up. I just want to work out how I want this to look. Now obviously this just looks like a pile of fondant balls, so we're going to make this look like a cloud. So the first thing I need to do is just take a small amount of edible glue, and I'm just going to start to glue these together. Now I am using quite a firm fondant for this, so this is the white fondant by Renshaw, and it's the extra stretch and extra smooth one. And this just means that those balls are just holding their shape. It also means that when I take a slightly larger amount of my fondant, I can roll this super thin. And I'm going to roll this out until it's large enough to go over all of those balls. And just push that fondant into place. So we're just trying to push it around those little balls without moving them. Now a great tip for shaping these is I've then got a paintbrush. So I'm going to go in with that paintbrush, pushing that fondant in to those gaps. And this is what is going to form our cloud. I'm going to take my craft knife and just cut around the edge, leaving around 1/2 centimetre. Very carefully flip it over, take some more edible glue just around that edge, and I'm just going to pull that fondant over. So this will give it a nice finish from the front. Now when I place that back down, I'm just placing it on a small piece of parchment paper, just in case there is any glue on the bottom, as I don't want it sticking to the board. Now, before I leave that to dry, I'm going to take my dummy cake again, make sure it hasn't moved. And there we have our first little 3D cartoon cloud. So I'm just going to pop this to one side, and I'm going to create enough just to come around the base of my cake. Here I've created 4 separate clouds, so this is enough to wrap around the whole of the bottom of my cake, just leaving a little gap between each of the clouds. So now I've got those clouds, we're gonna make some stars, and I want these to be quite cute and cartoony. So I'm starting off with some fondant, and I've just coloured this in a really light yellow using the Colour Splash Sunflower. I've then got a selection of different size star cutters. So we've got ones that you just push in, we've got some plunger cutters, and also this cute little cookie cutter. I'm then going to start by rolling out my fondant, and I'm just taking a small amount at a time. And for the slightly larger stars, I'm going to do these about 4 millimeters in thickness. Now to give these stars a slightly rounded edge, I'm going to take a piece of cling film or plastic wrap and just lay this over the top. This cookie cutter is around 1.5 inches in diameter, and as you can see, the cling film is just causing it to create a curved edge on the side. If we have a look at this star, this one does have quite short points, but I want it to be nice and rounded. So I'm just going to push my finger on the ends just to round those points over and just make it look super cute. Now, to give this a little bit more dimension, I'm going to add a little bit of color. So I've got some edible tints. I've got some buttermilk and also some tangerine orange. So I'm going to start off just with that buttermilk on my paintbrush and just dust it around the side, just bringing it slightly up onto the star, but still leaving that light yellow in the center. I'm then going to mix a bit of that buttermilk with the tangerine just to give me a light orange and go in just between those points, and this is really going to make them pop on that blue that we're using as the sky on our cake. Now, for these larger ones, I'm actually going to add a cute little face on the front. So I've got this black edible pen, and this one is just by Fractal Colors. So I'm going to go around halfway up my star, and I'm just going to draw on 2 oval shapes. I'm just going to draw a teeny tiny little smile underneath those. To finish these off, I've got some blush pink edible tint, and just with a really tiny amount on my paintbrush, I'm going to go in under those eyes and just add on some cute little cheeks. And here we have the cutest little star. Now I'm going to make a couple of these as I just think these are the cutest. I am going to create some more in some different sizes. So I've got a slightly smaller star cutter, and I'm going to cut this out in exactly the same way. I'm making my fondant a little bit thinner. So this one is around 3 millimeters in thickness, and I'm cutting out my star. Now this one has quite long points, and I still want to have these having a kind of a rounded effect. So I'm actually going to take my craft knife and just cut the points off of my star. So just coming in 1 to 2 millimeters and just trimming those off. I can then use my fingers just to round those over and give a similar shape to the larger one that we created. I can then go in with that edible tin and just add on the buttermilk and the tangerine, just really bringing those to life. And I'm going to do exactly the same with all the different sizes that I've got. So I'm going to create some really teeny tiny ones. So here we have a selection of the cutest stars. So I'm just going to set these to one side until we're ready to add them onto our cake. For the cake top, I'm going to be using some modelling paste. I've got a slightly large ball, and this is around 60 grams, and I've coloured this with the dark brown by Colour Splash. I've then got a small amount of black, some white, and a really tiny bit of yellow that I've just coloured using the sunflower yellow that we used for the stars. Okay, so I've got 4 balls of modelling paste here. I've got this ball, which is 36 grams, and this is for his body. I've then got another ball, which is 20 grams. This is going to be for his head. And then I've got 2 little balls here, which are 1.5 grams each, and these are going to be for his wings. So I'm just going to pop the ball for the head and the wings just to one side while we prepare his body. So you want to make sure that you roll it to get rid of any of those marks. I'm going to place that on the work surface and just push on the top just to give me a nice flat surface to add the head onto. So that is kind of all we have for the body. I'm then going to take the ball for his head. I'm going to start with a ball tool. So I'm just going to push in and create 2 eye sockets. And then I'm going to use my fingers just to start to open those out. Now on some owls you get these little feathers on the top. So all I'm going to do is put my finger in the socket and just pinch that top just to bring it up slightly, and do that on the other side. Now I'm just going to use my Dresden tool just to push down that middle. So we want it to go into a bit of a point, and you can just go back in and just put in those eye sockets. Now on the side of the head, I'm just going to pinch that in. And you just want to make sure that you're pinching the edge of those just to thin them out. And we want them to match as much as possible. For his eyes, I've got 2 balls of white, and these measure 0.8 grams each, or they're around 9 millimeters across. Now I'm going to start just by squishing these down slightly so I get 2 round discs. I'm going to pop on just a small amount of edible glue to help these stick. Push those into place. Just smoothing those down with my fingers, just making them slightly bigger, just so they look like they're quite flush against the rest of his face. I'm then going to take my Dresden tool, and I want just around the side of the eye to look quite feathery. So I'm just going to go in and just pull from the white and just pull that out and do the same to the other side. For his beak, I've got a very tiny amount of the yellow. So this is just 0.15 grams. Taper that down on one side to give us a point. And then on the other side, just flatten that down. So we want kind of a triangle shape. Push his little beak on. Now for his eyes, I've got a really tiny amount of black. I'm going to chop this in half as I want both of my eyes to be exactly the same size. And I can just roll these into a slight oval shape. Right in the center of his eye, just going to make a little hole, and exactly the same on the other side. Pop some edible glue in there, pick those eyes up and just pop those into those holes. Now with my characters, I always like to add just a tiny little white dot onto their eye. So I'm going to bring back out his body. So you're just trying to make the two parts come neatly together. Now, before I stick them down, I'm going to work on his little wings. So I've got those two balls and these were 1.5 grams each. So I'm going to start just by tapering these down, flattening that down into a teardrop shape, which is going to be perfect as a wing. Now on this top curve, I'm actually going to push down and with my ball tool, curve it round slightly. And you want it so it's going to just sit neatly on the top. And I'm going to do exactly the same to the other side. I'm then going to take my Dresden tool and I'm just going to run it along that edge. So just at the front, but the two pieces are completely stuck together. On the front of his body, I'm going to put just some little V's in there, just so it looks like little feathers. So then pop on some edible glue. I'm going to add that on. Now to bring him to life a little bit more, I'm going to add a little bit more colour. So I've just got some chocolate brown edible tint, and just between his head and his body and down his feathers, I'm just adding that on with a fluffy brush. So just really leaving the centre of his tummy in that light brown. So there we have our little owl all ready to add onto our cake, and he measures 5 centimeters in height. So the next thing we want to do is cover our cake board. Now here I've got a 9-inch drum board, and this one just measures 1 centimeter in height. Now to determine the size of your cake board, you just want to make sure that it's going to be big enough for those clouds around the edge. Now I'm going to be covering my board in some white fondant, and to work out how much fondant I'm going to need, I've actually used my new fondant guide. So this is my table, this is the paneling method, as I'm going to be using the paneling method around the side of my cake, but there's also one for the all-in-one method as well. But if we take the first column, so this is the height of the cake is 0 inches, so this is for a cake board. Come down to 9 inches, I know that I need 236 grams of fondant, and that's going to be enough for me to cover my cake board. Now if you want to get this fondant guide, I will put a link in the description below so you can download the guide for yourselves. So I'm just going to roll out this fondant, just popping down a bit of corn flour to stop it sticking. I'm then going to add a little bit of water onto my cake board just to help that stick. Lay that over the top and just smooth that out with my paddle smoothers. I've then got my pizza cutter going around the edge, just trimming off that excess before adding a pretty white ribbon around the side of the cake board. We can then pop this to one side and it's all ready for us to add our cake. So now we've got most of the decorations, it's now time to prepare the cake. So I'm using some 5-inch chocolate sponge cakes. So I've just taken off the dome on the top just to level them up. I'm then using some chocolate ganache, which I'm going to layer between those layers, and I'm also going to use this as a crumb coat around the outside. Now all a crumb coat is just a thin layer. It's just going to lock in those loose crumbs. Now I have had these cakes in the fridge for a little while just to chill slightly to make it easier when I took the domes off the top. But when these come back to room temperature, they will be nice and soft and fluffy. I can then pop this in the fridge for around 15 to 20 minutes just for that ganache to firm up. So I'm ready to add the next layer of ganache. Now to add the next layer of ganache, I'm going to be using some ganaching plates. These are great to get really smooth sides, which is really important for this cake as we'll be covering it in fondant, so it gives us a good base to work with. So my cake has come out of the fridge. I've popped some parchment paper onto my ganaching plates, so I'm just going to place my cake on that bottom disc. I'm then going to add some ganache onto the top and just get this as nice and smooth and level as I can before I add that top ganaching plate. I'm then taking my scraper and I want to make sure that these two plates are in line with each other, as this is going to give me nice straight sides. Add some ganache starting at the top and the bottom and filling in the middle before running around with that smoother. Now this does take going around a few times, so first of all I'm just taking off a lot of the excess, filling in any gaps, and as you go around a few times you can just see that it's getting nice and smooth. Now, if you've never used ganaching plates or you want to find out some more information, I do have a more detailed video on using these, which I will put a link to in the description below. Once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'm going to pop this in the fridge just for that ganache to fully firm up. I'm then going to carefully remove that ganaching plate from the top. I can then go in just with a little bit more ganache and just fix any areas that need fixing. I can then do the same on the bottom, so just really carefully going in, just separating that cake from the bottom plate. Now the cake is nice and firm, so I'm just going to tilt that to one side, get out that piece of parchment paper, and then I can transfer this cake onto a clean board ready to cover it in fondant. Now I want this cake to look like the night sky. You could just cover it in one colour, but I actually want to create a slight ombre effect. So it's dark at the top and then goes a lot lighter where we've got those clouds. You could do this effect with an airbrush, but I'm actually going to use fondant. I've actually got some pre-coloured fondant. So this is the fondant by Renshaw. So I've got a navy blue, Atlantic blue, and a turquoise blue. And I'm going to be putting these on the cake using the paneling method. So again, I've got my paneling method guide, so I need to work out the size of my cake. So we've got a 5-inch cake that is 5 inches in height. So I know that I'm going to need 468 grams of fondant to cover this cake. So first of all, I'm going to cover the top. So I've just taken 100 grams of the navy blue. Now to help that fondant stick to my cake, I've just brushed on some boiled water mixed with some icing sugar, just to create a kind of a glue. And then you want a super sharp craft knife. So I'm going to go around and just follow the edge of my cake. Now I've weighed the excess that I had left over from the top. So if I take that away from the 100 grams that I started with, so divide this by 3, I need 137 grams of each of my 3 colours. I'm going to roll these into sausage shapes. So I'm going to start with the darkest on one side. Now at the moment we have a quite distinctive straight line between them. So we want to blend these together. Start just by rolling that out, and then want to take one end and just pull that back on itself. Keep rolling it, and we don't want it to become too wide. So I'm going to bring it in, just pushing it with my hand. I can then fold it over again, and you just want to keep going. So this is gonna take a little while, but you want those lines to start to blend in to each other. So we're just rolling, pushing back in, folding over, and you can fold it either way. Now I've been rolling it for a few minutes, and you can start to see that those colours are starting to blend into each other. And once you're happy with how that's looking, I'm going to roll this out until it's a large enough panel to wrap around the whole of my cake. And you can use a piece of ribbon or a tape measure just to measure the circumference of your cake. Once we've got our panel rolled out, I'm then going to chop just a small amount along the bottom just to give us a nice straight line. And I'm going to do exactly the same down one side. I'm then going to take a rolling pin and just really carefully wrap my fondant up, just really loosely, making sure that I keep the bottom edge straight. I can then place that fondant onto my cake and I'm going to just unwind that. On this seam, cut through both layers, peel that back, pinching at that seam slightly. I'm then going to go in, just smooth that down with my paddle smoother, and as I did before, just cut off the excess. We're then going to set about making this nice and neat. First of all, just running those paddle smoothers around the outside, just smoothing that fondant onto the cake. I can then go in with my 2 paddle smoothers, just using these together, and we just really want to get rid of that seam around the top. Now, you never 100% get rid of the seam when doing this method, but the more you work those 2 pieces of fondant together, it does start to disappear. So once you're happy with how that's looking, you can then go in. I've just got some flexi smoothers here, which just allows you to add a little bit more pressure on certain areas. So there we have the cake that just has this really pretty ombre effect, going from dark blue through to a slightly lighter blue and the really light blue at the bottom. I'm then going to carefully transfer this over onto the cake board that we covered in that white fondant. I've then got my 3D clouds, which have firmed up really well, and I'm going to place those onto my cake. So I'm just going to leave a small gap between each one. Now, I know we've got our stars to add, but to make this look a little bit more like the night sky, I'm going to paint on a few stars. So to do this, I've just got some edible art white paint and a really fine paintbrush. I'm then going to paint just a really fine little cross with some diagonal lines, just to look like a little star. And to go with this, I'm just going to add in some little dots, just to look like little twinkles. Now, this cake is for Hendrix's 2nd birthday, so I'm going to add a number 2 on the front. So I've got just a ball of normal fondant that I've coloured with some black, just to give me a light grey. And I've also got a number 2 template. I just freehand drew a number 2 on a piece of paper and cut it out. So this one is around 2 inches in height. One tip when cutting shapes out of fondant is I'm going to start just by going in and just scoring, so I'm not cutting all the way through, and this will help the number 2 keep its shape when I go in and cut it out fully. Else, if you try and cut all the way through at once, it can start to pull where that fondant is quite stretchy. I've then got some light silver edible luster dust, and this one is by Sweet Sticks. And I'm going to mix that with some dipping solution to create a little edible metallic paint. And this will just make it shimmer on the front of the cake. The last thing that we need to make is some little clouds for our owl to sit on. I want to create a little white platform, and this is what I can attach all of the balls onto. So I'm just going to roll out a piece of fondant about 1/2 centimetre in thickness. I can then just roughly draw around the owl and cut this out, adding on some balls. And I don't want to make them so big that they cover the owl. Once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'm going to do just as I did before, so just gluing those all in place, and then I can roll out some fondant and cover this entire thing. Before going in with my paintbrush and my Dresden tool, I can then cut that out, just leaving a little bit of excess, turning it over and just gluing that down into place. And then pop a little bit of glue to pop in our little owl. We've then got all of those stars that we made. I'm going to start with one just up here, just keeping our little owl company. I'm then going to add another one with a smiley face just down at the bottom, and then just place some stars on the cake. And you also don't want to forget just about the back I just think these look so lovely against that blue. And lastly, I'm going to place on that number 2. So here we have the finished birthday cake with this cute little owl sitting on his cloud surrounded by these little stars. I really hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial and maybe you'd want to make this cake yourself. If you have enjoyed the video, as always, please don't forget to hit that like button. And if you'd like to see more videos like this and you haven't already, or maybe you're new to the channel, then don't forget to subscribe to the Cakes by Nin's YouTube channel. So until next time, bye!